it is the conflict. Whether Europe will be militarized, will military actions between Israel and Iran escalate? Could it possible that China attack Taiwan? How will other regional conflict develop? Because the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London published the latest edition of its annual review of armed conflicts in early December 2023. And this paper mentioned that 183 military conflicts in the world today we can see as of the end of 2023. And this is a very short list of issues that affect the modern contours of the system of relations between states in the international arena. This is a thread that binds the political will of some international leaders. Trying to answer these questions and assessing the scale of the Russian invasion, opinion leaders often appeal to emotions, patriotism, or propaganda in their assessments. It leads to the pictures largely based on emotions and personal experience. It transmits an incomplete model of reality to people around the world on the one hand, and has some wrecking impact on the decision-making process on the other. The rhetoric of Russia's president and political elites representatives provide us with the conclusion that Russia's actions have a powerful component of their identity politics. The article on the historical unity of Russia and Ukraine, statements on the collapse of the Soviet Union and Russia's place in the modern world, we can find positions argued by characters and narratives of the Russian values and its place in the modern world. In the first part of his article, Putin talks about the history of ancient Russia and argues that the name Ukraine was used often to mean like outskirts. In Putin's mind, ancient Russia was inhabited by Slavs and other tribes. Putin defined the modern Ukraine as entirely brainchild of the Soviet era. Recalling the Ukrainians, Brezhnev and Khrushchev led the country and the party, and they, the Bolsheviks, had helped develop Ukrainian culture and identity through indigenization. The Bolsheviks arbitrarily cut the borders, disturbed generous territory gifts, and Russia was actually robbed. As a result, the collapse of the Soviet Union is assessed as a general geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, demanding the return of NATO's infrastructure to 1997 levels. He tries to replay the Cold War. NATO enlargement to the east didn't take place this year. It means that countries of the former Soviet Union's sphere of influence didn't join the organization. At the same time, the West is seen as an unreliable partner accused of unfair political play. All periods of confrontation, escalation since 1991 between Ukraine and Russia revolve around Ukrainians' attempt to integrate into liberal democratic structures. The Orange Revolution, signing the association agreement with EU, the revolution of dignity, fixing the Euro-Atlantic vector in Ukraine's constitution, and the recent parliament and president elections. All these facts confirm the thesis that Putin's actions today are a threat not only to the spread, but also to the existence of liberal democratic values. Undemocratic regimes may try to threaten both the frontiers of borders and zones of influence on the political map of the world. Putin's speeches indicate some allies countries as a Russian potential targets. They are seen as an area of influence of the empire that the Russian president is trying to restore. And returning to the logic of the Cold War, the liberal democratic community is perceived as the enemy. Therefore, we can conclude that this war has the potential to grow into regional and global one precisely because of a powerful component of identity policy regarding the Putin's regime, perceptions of Russia's place and zone of influence in the international arena, as well as exciting threats, including hybrid threats. The threat posed by Islamic or secular but undemocratical regimes in the world is also possible. American President Joe Biden confirmed these threats with a Warsaw speech some years ago. The way out of this situation is a complex interaction of the free world with Ukraine, first of all, USA, Great Britain, NATO, and the EU. The behavior of these actors fits into the traditional perceptions of realpolitik and idealpolitik models, which are inherent in individual states of the liberal democratic world. But the threat from the Putin's regime today is a reality that requires consolidated action by these states and organizations, because the EU and NATO countries are seen as targets and their inaction as a possible reason to support Russia from other countries with a different values base. Ex-UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, in his speech at the Royal United Services Institution for Defense and Security Studies, could be very useful on this part of the speech. Even though these words contain the case of Afghanistan, they very accurately illustrate the current situation. Maybe my generation of leaders were naive in thinking countries could be remade, or maybe the remaking needed to last longer. But we should never forget, as we see the women of Afghanistan in the media, culture, and civic society now flee in fear of their lives, that our values are still those that free people chose. Recovering confidence in our values and in their universal application is a necessary part of ensuring we stand up for them and are prepared to defend them. It is particularly important that today we observe not only different approaches to the end of this war and the transformation of that means to ensure international security, but also different approaches to the process of securitization of the problem of a full-scale war started by Russia against Ukraine in the speeches of various political figures around the world. And under these conditions, the benefit of conducting international scientific and practical events is consisted in the fact that with joint efforts, we investigate the threats, we accept and find common solution for their submissions, which accordingly can become the basis for the decision-making process in the existing political life. I thank everyone for the opportunity to present this speech, and I wish all of us the fruitful work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for sharing your ideas. All of us is greatly and totally agree with you. And thank you so much for participating in our conference. And we are happy to see our colleagues as a participants. Thank you so much. And we go through and our next speaker with a great pleasure. I want to invite our other co-organizer, Anastasia Spontis, Doctor, Professor of Berlin School of Business and Innovation. Anastasia, you're welcome. The stage is yours.
I switch on my Zoom. I think you hear me more. Is it okay? Oh.
We can hear you by the microphones.
It is better like this? Huh? It's fine, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so I'm audible. Okay, thank you very much, Vera and Irina, for the invitation. We had a very big discussion. I will start with something that Maxim said before about the war. It is a difficult time for Ukraine, and there is the famous phrase of the Greek historian Herodotus that the father of history is war. So in these moments, such conferences help to have a better understanding of what is happening, but of course with all the problems that such a situation is bringing for the Ukrainian nation. The subject I'm presenting here is one of the difficult ones, and I'm saying it's about the state of exception. We had the chance almost 2 years ago in another conference to discuss. It is a concept developed by a famous but still ambiguous person. It's from Carl Schmitt. And I will say some things about him and this work. The state of exception, practically what I'm trying to do here, it is to map the state of exception the last 2 years in Ukraine, and you will come closer to this idea together. And on top of this, I will introduce the next speaker, because we are in the same area and I got inspired by him in some of this, but I will explain this during the presentation. So mapping the state of exception in Ukraine, the last 2 years. Okay, we can go. Just change to the next. Okay, we'll see what is the state of exception, how is it defined, the basic postulates, the basic ideas presented of Carl Schmitt that I'm putting into this kind of model. There is also another idea, what's called the nomos of the earth. There is too much text in this presentation. We will have later on a more thorough analysis via text, but I will go fast through the basic ideas in order to see how I see what is happening. Okay, and then when you will see the picture, it will be much easier for everybody. And of course, there is a need in order to, when we are building such a model, it is interesting always and necessary to have what we call the metrics, the monads, the ideas on how we build it. So we go for the first slide. Okay, what is the state of exception? Carl Schmitt started with this famous phrase in 1922, 102 years ago. He said that the sovereign, practically sovereign is the ruler of a state, is the one who decides on the state of exception. Okay, this is the one who has the power. So to keep it short, 24th of February 2022, practically President Zelensky already from the previous day, he's declaring the martial law. Okay, in this moment, Ukraine is going definitely to the state of exception. We'll see that it happened also before, but with other ideas. The interesting with Carl Schmitt, and I will give you the next slide more details about this, is that practically the sovereign and the state are becoming his ideas one. So in this moment that the president says, we go this way, this is what is happening. Nobody's going. Then I know that Vernaia Rada approved that. It is a rolling process since this day. And practically from the whole work, this is part of the previous work we have presented 2 years ago, it is that there are some postulates, some ideas. Okay, the sovereign is the one who decides for the state of exception. We saw that. He describes as a basis for everything the action of the political. So political means we are thinking politically, therefore we are organizing ourselves in societies, in systems. And this is a phrase from German translated in English. The concept of the political is the presupposition of the concept of the state. We think that we should have a state and then the state is getting created. And here, the third one is what is most known for, it is the friend and enemy. This means we are having political ideas. The ones who agree are the ones that are friends. The ones that they are against these ideas are our enemies. So he's making this bipolar structure, and he says, you agree with me, you are the sovereign side, you are with the state, therefore, you are a friend. If you are against this, you are an enemy. And the last idea, it is he speaks about non-state actors, about partisan. He has done this work after the Second World War, because he recognized that you may have always some groups that they are coming into the game and they are influencing the situation. The next one. Thank you. Okay. I go fast through this. He built also a geopolitical structure, what he calls the law, the nomos of the earth, and he tries with this to explain how we function as sovereign states. So in the moment that for one more time, the Russian Federation invaded officially, although it was never accepted, they call this with the SVO, the Special Military Operation. It started the war, and this went practically through the critical states that we define very often, you may know, as Westphalian peace. So that you have a state and you do not intervene in it. Let's go in the next one. And here is the question. In the bibliography,
Сама єш.
What is very interesting here to go to see the Ukrainian case, as I called it, it is practically that in the bibliography, there is always a very big discussion. Carl Schmitt, because of this concept of the sovereign, supported practically the National Socialist regime. This is why he has done it. But as the colleague Professor Auer will show to you, we can take these ideas in order to strengthen the democracies, to make a stress test, to reverse it. Okay, so the problem is when somebody is writing about Carl Schmitt, he should be always apologetic. Yes, I know, but because it was in this context, this should not be used. And this is the breakthrough practically. And also, there is a very often the discussion about how systematic he is. He throws different ideas in books, as we know, because he's a lawyer. And is there a cohesion? So, and in order, I'm writing here, is this really the case? And let's go for the case. And this is the part that becomes interesting. So what is mentioned or marked here with red is what he calls the state of exception. So the state of exception is when a sovereign is coming into the game and he says, from now on, this is how we are, and everybody should follow. There are some limitations, we will see this later, and perhaps in the discussion. So I took, on the left side, you see, we have the Ukraine, you have the sovereign, practically, and the authority, practically, of the sovereign, practically the president, historically, gave this martial law as I described. It gave also other, so we had previously sovereigns like President Yanukovych, who has come in this deadlock practically with the Euromaidan in 2014, or the ATO with Poroshenko, when the situation started becoming more and more difficult. And to this side, to the surprise, of course, of the Russian Federation, we are having somehow what Maxim described before, shortly, the new coalition, which is coming to back with all the difficulties and all the limitations, and Stefan will speak more about this, with the United States, with the European Union and NATO. On the other side, you see, we are having what I call here control. It is practically somebody has to control the situation, the handling of war. I will show in the next slide, which will be the final one, some more details about this. We have the discussion of the freedom of speech. I saw that some of the colleagues speak later on about this. We have the legislation and the control of the pro-Russian media and parties, that it was perpetual, but it has been finalized in, after the Russian invasion, practically. And you have on the other side, you see on the left hand side, you have who is the friend and who is the enemy. I'm keeping the time.
So I have a problem with my computer.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Okay, I continue. I know the model, just and it will come with the restart. Practically, on the other side, opposite to the sovereign, we had the case of Russia that tried once with the, as you will see when the picture will reappear, tried with to give the final big hit with the SVO, and before with Lugansk and Donetsk and the People's Republic, it was a continuous pressure, and this was the legitimation in brackets to justify how once Putin justified this idea. On the other side, I have the opposite side. So if somebody sees what is Russia, practically. So we see that there is a system, practically, where the President Putin practically has the system with Siloviki, with this continuous propaganda, and since I would say over 20 years. And on the other side, he has also a kind of friction because he cannot control the people. Okay, there is the suppression which is given, but with acts like mobilization, the partial mobilization he was doing in several waves, the people are starting having doubts. I know you are living with this problem. I see this from an external internal view, but what is a matter of fact, the whole narrative is not any more convincing also internally in the Russian Federation. And then, of course, you have on the other side, when we take our time, you have the reaction from the part of Ukraine, where, because I spoke before about what is the partisan activity, you see that this reaction against the sovereign of Russia, which is all this transition of the war in the territory of the Russian Federation. Okay, the psychological warfare, the social media, and all these acts are practically a reaction against the sovereign of the other entity who is practically making the war. Okay, it will come in once. And it is the previous, it's go up again, one or two more, because I have more, and one more. Okay, this is it. Okay, this one. Okay. Okay, and this is as you say, we have practically the friend and enemy in its cases, and they are pushing to another direction. The whole idea, this is in a context of what we call before the nomos, of the sovereignty. So what we have in this case, we are having one state directly going to the territory of the other one, and here you see this kind of pushing from both sides. Let's go to the next one. I'm putting a methodological question here. First, is the sovereign really sovereign? And this is, in a few minutes, we will hear a little bit more about these ideas, how this is acting in the context of the real democracies, okay, where we don't have a dictator, practically, but we're having an elected president who has to take some decisions. The next one, it is, are there only friends and enemies, or we have what we call friendlies? I will give you the very direct example. If we were speaking even before 2014, many people in Ukraine, and I know this from friends, and by being here, would say, you know, with Russia, we are one. There are some problems, but we will find a solution. What is the result after 10 years? A completely different situation, very distinct friends and enemies. and that this will not recover for sure for generations. Let's go to I have just to make the last two statements. Practically about the sovereign's power, we said, is this practically the case that the sovereign has real power? We see that there are many discussions about when the president here in Ukraine is taking decisions within this framework of the war. I'm having here what I call food for thought. I write, we can discuss it later. Was Yanukovych sovereign in 2014? He lost the game, practically. He tried to balance. Let me say, I consider him always as a little bit tragic figure. He has done so many mistakes, and although he was trying to balance the two situations, and this is what happened later on. And the second question here is, will Ukraine ever return to the before the Russian invasion state? My direct answer here always, from my study and from my political sense, it is no, it will be a new country. Let's go to the last one. I think this is the last one. And the frenemies, this is the question that this new term which is getting introduced. It exists in the literature, but here, food for thought are the ontologies. What are these frenemies? There are some categories, but this is part of another discussion. And I give, in order to make it more visible in front of our eyes, that our presidency or General Zaluzny, we saw in the media what happened, or Yevgeny Prigozhin, practically, with his action against whatever he wanted to achieve once. They were frenemies. Suddenly, Prigozhin has become a frenemy because it was to the interest of Ukraine. If this would be practically, even for this 1 week, this is a change. So this is a flowing idea. So the frenemy, it is somewhere, it's a continuum between the friend and the enemy of Carl Schmitt. And as I said, this is a further analysis that it will be done later. And I think I'm going to the last one. Yes, thank you very much. And I'm introducing very fast Stefan. Stefan inspired me because he wrote a very interesting article called Carl Schmitt in Kremlin. This means that how Carl Schmitt was perceived as an authoritarian writer in order to justify how practically Putin is ruling. And he was used very often from an idea. It was from the name Alexander Dugin. So recently he has a very interesting book that I propose to everybody. That I'm going again to Maxim's initial speech. He has written a book named European Disunion, not European Union, the problems that we're having, and hopefully sooner or later Ukraine will become a part of it. And I'm finishing with the latest work he has done. He has done a chapter in a book called Carl Schmitt in Brussels. So this means the state of exception has come also in our house in the European Union. So Stefan, thank you for being with us today. It is a big honor, and he's in Hong Kong, just for your information. So we have people from all over the globe. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction and for flagging a couple of publications that I based my presentation on. I will not talk as much about Carl Schmitt, so thank you for kind of paving the way for my arguments. I'll focus on EU-Ukraine relationship, but I will view it from a kind of Schmittian perspective. But I want to clarify one thing. I'm not defensive about Carl Schmitt. He was a horrible human being. He made terrible political choices, but he was also a brilliant political thinker. And I'm inspired by Chantal Mouffe, distinguished political theorist who urged us to think with Carl Schmitt against Carl Schmitt. But so this is not a defense of Schmitt. This is just to think about the issues that both the EU, Ukraine face as they confront Russia. And I'm really grateful both for your kind invitation to talk to you and for your introduction of my book. So as I said, the presentation is kind of follow-up, and I'm currently working on a sequel to this book, which just came out at basically I was finishing it when the invasion started. So I have a contract with the same publisher, Hearst, to write a sequel. So I'll be very keen to hear your feedback, and I'm very happy to share my publications, the PDF form, with anyone who might be interested. So please email me afterwards. So this is my talk, and you also kindly mentioned the article from 2015, where I flagged the problem that Europe faced, and that is that Russia was inspired by Schmidt and behaved as a kind of Schmittian sovereign, and that in response to Russia, and this was shortly after the Crimea invasion, the EU too has to become much more robust, which is the predicament that the EU now finds itself in. And so this is the problem, I think, for the EU. Good Europeans have a problem. The problem is called Russia, and the two presentations preceding me explained why, and I don't need to tell my Ukrainian colleagues, friends, why is the case, right? The track record of good Europeans on Russia and Ukraine is not all that great, and that's not surprising. The EU was not created for this kind of war. The EU, or even supporting a neighboring nation in a war, right? The EU was created for the post-war reconstruction of Europe, and now rather abruptly, the EU is forced to become a kind of Schmittian sovereign, as Anastasios nicely explained, right? So I'm reading this brilliant biography of your brilliant President Zelensky, and there is one moment that I found really quite striking, right? That described really vividly the first couple of days in Kiev, and you are in a better position to tell me how accurate the description is. But yeah, for me, a heroic figure, right? He was offered to escape, and instead of asking to be rescued, as Simon Schuster writes, President Zelensky demanded an answer to a question Ukraine had been posing for decades: would it ever be allowed to join the European Union? Now, my question is, that is at the heart of my presentation, was this the right moment for it? Was there ever a right moment for it? And is this a metaphor for Ukraine's many problems? Instead of focusing squarely on the very survival of the nation as independent from Russia, its leaders, including your amazing president, fantasized about EU membership, an elusive dream that should not have been perhaps the government's top priority. So, and there I would argue, going back to Hobbes, that you need to solve Hobbesian problem of basic security first before any promise of economic prosperity and political stability become truly realistic. So my ideas are somewhat heretical. I am not challenging the idea that Ukraine belongs to Europe, far from it. I am just despairing at the EU's inability to adequately, address the challenge that it faces when dealing with Ukraine and with Russia. And there is an apparent paradox, right? So the EU traditionally sees itself as being good at dealing with emergencies, and yet major EU leaders, I believe, have failed to live up to this decisive emergency so far. And that is where I agree with the two previous presenters. This is a decisive moment for Europe, not just for Ukraine. So on the one hand, you have this spectacle of Ursula von der Leyen visiting Kiev more frequently than any other Western leader, perhaps. And yet, on the other hand, it is leaders like Boris Johnson or President Biden, who was mentioned in the first presentation, who were in a much better position to get things done, to get the support that Ukrainians needed. Particularly in the first couple of months of the war, I think that without the US support, without Poland's support, without the UK support, correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that Ukraine would not be still standing, right? So don't get me wrong. I believe that Europe and the West as a whole has no alternative but to support Ukraine in order to stop Russia's imperial ambition. But I'm not convinced that the EU is the best vehicle to pursue that goal. Endless talks about the EU's geopolitical moment and Europe's strategic autonomy notwithstanding. And this is where Schmittian perspective, I believe, is quite enlightening, because Schmidt draws our attention to the challenges that the polity has when it faces an exceptional moment, and war is undoubtedly one of those moments. And here again, like just a few days, of course, after the full-blown invasion of Ukraine, President Zelensky officially requested full membership in the EU. Now, I teach European studies. I have taught European studies for the last 10 years here at the University of Hong Kong in faraway China. Well, it's a special region of China. And I always started my lecture on Ukraine and EU with this inspiring image, right? Again, I don't need to remind you of those crucial events, but I find it powerful because I asked the students, you know, what does the EU flag represent there, right? In the middle of the picture, in the midst of these upheavals, it's Maidan movement, right? And for me, it beautifully illustrates soft power Europe, right? That was the moment where Ukrainians, I don't think that many Ukrainians believe that Ukraine would be a full member of the EU overnight, but they look towards Europe for support for their democratic movement, right? Fast forward 8 years, and this is one dramatic moment, right? Shortly before the full-blown invasion, when many members of Verkhovna Rada were aware of the fact that the war might be imminent. And look at the flags there, right? And I asked the students which flags are missing and which are there. And of course, the EU flag is no longer there. What's more, the key nation states of the EU, France and Germany, are missing. And instead, we have Poland, the Czech Republic, the UK, even far away Canada, NATO, of course. So I think that the members of Verkhovna Rada rightly judged that the vital help that they needed to maintain the very survival of Ukraine would come from nation states rather than this supranational polity. And that is where the Schmittian perspective on the EU is relevant. I believe that Europe largely failed Ukraine 10 years ago in 2014, and it's likely to fail again over the next few years. And I'm sorry about this pessimistic view on things. And that's a strong claim. Europe has failed Ukraine. The extent of that failure is likely to be more clear in years to come. But the reasons are clearly discernible already. The European Union is a unique polity, it's an in-between experimental polity that did not, and indeed could not, live up to the expectations it itself gave rise to, turning Ukraine into a thriving, prosperous, and stable liberal democracy independent of Russia. Because the EU was and is not a military actor, right? In fact, its emphasis on soft or smart power facilitated and accelerated demilitarization of a number of its member states, particularly Germany. Now, Germany has done a lot, of course, over the last 2 years, but arguably not enough. So for me, the tragedy is that the EU, as an in-between polity, unwittingly reinforced Ukraine's status as an in-between country with tragic consequences, right? And then additionally, you have Europe misapprehending the nature of the threat emanating from Russia. And that's true, of course, of the collective West. I think that the US under President Obama misjudged the danger of Russia too. But the immediate consequences of this misjudgment will be far greater in Europe than in the United States. So where did it all go wrong? The primary culprit, of course, is in Kremlin. I don't want to be any doubts about that. But European political leaders share the deal of responsibility too. And I don't mean just Gerhard Schröder, the former prime minister of Germany, the most prominent advocate of the Wandel durch Handel, that is, you know, transformation through trade. There are other leaders, including Angela Merkel, who was until quite recently celebrated as a great leader of the free Western world. So I argued in a recent article again that I'm very happy to share with anyone who is interested, that there is a consistent theme in EU foreign policy, and that is over-promising and under-delivering. And that is potentially not a huge issue in kind of conventional policy areas. But when it comes to support of Ukraine, I think that the consequences are oftentimes catastrophic, right? You can't promise 1 million pieces of ammunition and then deliver only 500,000 of them, right? That has profound and direct consequences on the way the war is conducted. But I don't think, and that is probably where I'm at odds with many of my EU specialist EU colleagues, I don't think that the solution is to turn Europe into a proper kind of supranational state, the kind of idea that Emmanuel Macron advanced, and he's about to give another speech where he will probably restate that point, and Olaf Scholz supports, because I don't think that the EU can ever be the kind of Schmittian sovereign that would have an effective army to stand up to Russia. I think that is for NATO to do and nation states. And I think that the best illustration of that problem is the way in which Germany was painfully, incredibly slow in delivering on its promises. And again, I realize that by now, Germany is in Europe almost certainly the most significant donor to Ukraine. But when it comes to military capabilities, which I understand Ukraine needs more than anything, Germany is still a laggard in some areas. So you tell me whether this is for real, that Scholzing is a verb now in Ukraine, as Timothy Garton-Ash reported, but I think the problem is very real, that and I think that problem applies to not just Germany, but the EU as a whole. EU communicated good intentions only to find it when any reason imaginable to delay these and or prevent them from happening. I think in the case of EU, there really was also a massive mismatch between what the EU could do and what it aspired to do. So that takes me to my very brief concluding remarks, and I like to cite Timothy Snyder, a brilliant historian of Ukraine, of Russia, of that part of the world, who was right to say that Ukraine has no future without Europe, but Europe has also no future without Ukraine. What is important, though, about this quote, and again, I discuss it with my students every year when I teach European studies. He said this in the immediate aftermath of the Maidan movement and the occupation of Crimea. So this is 10 years ago, almost to the day. And his warning was ignored then in capitals that matter, like Berlin, Paris, and yes, even Brussels. And so were similar warnings by governments and observers in countries of Central and Eastern Europe, like Poland. EU-Europe should not make the same mistake again. Its future lies in a Europe that is more heterogeneous, more at ease with its internal differences. And that would be my argument in favor of empowering member states. And I think it's also revealing that Ukraine is now reaching a number of bilateral agreements with major nation states, including the UK. And I was delighted to see that the UK also increased the support for Ukraine just a couple of days ago. So EU-Europe should not make the same mistake again. Its future lies in a Europe that is more heterogeneous, more at ease with its internal differences, and more confident about its peoples. And I use peoples in plural, both as EU citizens and their nation states. The dream of European sovereignty, which President Macron articulated and Chancellor Scholz supports, should not be pursued at the expense of Ukrainian sovereignty. So I'll leave it at that, but I am keen to get some questions if there is time for it. And I am also very, very happy to share my publications, because I realize this is very rushed and I was only able to touch on a number of questions there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of speakers, for such interesting information. I'm amazed that you have so much information about Ukraine, that you know our history, modern history, so deeply. Thank you so much for the supporting words like we see right now on our screens. We also hope that Ukraine has no future without Europe, and that Europe also interested in Ukraine as usual and right now. I see the raised hand from Katerina, one of our speakers. I'd like to inform that we will have a time for discussion, or we should hear your question right now. Katerina?
Oh, hello. Thank you so much. I had a little comment on this presentation and the ideas I have heard recently, but as far as we will have time for discussion, the separate time for discussion, I will leave it just for the discussion time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we can go through, and I'd like to invite to make presentation our friend Evgen Magda. He is PhD in political science, associate professor of National Technical University, Sikorsky Kyiv Polytechnical Institute. There are some changes in our program. Some participants asked us to such changes. So I hope it will be okay for everybody else to give a stage to Evgen. Welcome. I will share your presentation for minutes.
Hello, thank you very much for possibility to take part in this very interesting meeting, very interesting conference, because I think that our today live in time of war is not only big challenge, but also it's because we live in time of big challenges and big threats, and I have a presentation about Russian propaganda and influence of Russian propaganda in maybe I come in. Sorry, just a minute. I have special. Okay, and I want to speak today about informational challenge of large-scale Russian aggression against Ukraine. We must understand that contemporary war is not only war for territories, but also is the war with our minds, with our citizenship, with our understanding of future of Ukraine and the future of Europe. I think that key facts about Russian propaganda are that propaganda is part of modern warfare, and Russian power, Kremlin, very well understand the role of propaganda in modern warfare. Russia have a powerful propaganda machine. It was created not today and not yesterday. It was created few years ago. It was created in start of 21st century, and have interesting and strong components. For example, after death of Yevgeny Prigozhin, Olgina factory of trolls controlled by Russian power, and it's not a big new. The basis of Russian propaganda are process of dehumanization of Ukrainians, and it's a cosplay of Soviet propaganda in time of World War II. For example, in 1942, very well known Soviet journalist and poet Konstantin Simonov write a short poetry, "Kill Him." In this poetry, he proposed to kill all Germans, Germans, not only Nazis, but all Germans, and it was a bright example of Soviet propaganda. The brightest example of Russian propaganda is a story from Slavyansk in 2014, story about classified boy, розіп'ятий хлопчик. And it's a very well known fake, and maybe biggest fake in hybrid warfare between 2014 2022, and many people know about this fake and understand the role of this propaganda effort. Kremlin propaganda has a schizophrenic nature. In Ukraine, Ukraine is a failed state, but Putin's article about unity of Russian and Ukrainian was printed on Kremlin site, official site in summer 2021, and Putin says about Ukrainians as a brotherly nation. But we must speak about very interesting problem and very interesting possibility. And I think that the basic principles of Kremlin propaganda are released on the experience of World War II and the Cold War. Unconditional confidence in its own righteousness. The Kremlin propaganda builds on priority of Russia in all the world, and it's a symbol of Russism, a symbol of new ideology with very intensified exploration of idea of big Russian nation, of idea of Ruski Mir, and in this reality, Russia used carpet bombing of messages with its own agenda. Russia has many ways to promote propaganda and many ways to say about narratives from Kremlin. And we must understand that Russia can change vectors of activity, because after full-scale invasion in Ukraine, many European countries were banned the Russia Today television or Sputnik Media news agency, but now Kremlin used the state news agency TASS and RIA Novosti to promote fakes and it's a very interesting and very sharp problem. What are the main messages of Russian propaganda? Russia don't want to speak about war with Ukraine, and Kremlin use only words special military operation, because Russia don't want to create effect of rights between Ukraine and Russia. The slogans of denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, it's not reality, it's Kremlin fantasies. Russian propagandists very active used lexicon from the World War II and Cold War, Nazis, Banderevцы, and many similar words. In Ukraine, in point of view of Russian propaganda, Russia is fighting against NATO, and Russia promotes its own version of historical memory, and the main historian in Russia is not academician Chubaryan or head of military historical society Medinsky, but the main historian in Russia is Vladimir Putin. Kremlin propaganda very active underwrite that Western aid to Ukraine is ineffective. Russia used high-level nuclear blackmail about Zaporizhia power plant, about dirty bomb, creating of dirty bomb by Ukrainians, but it's a fake. And Russia very active, create active measures in bordering states with Ukraine. And we must understand that the problem of Polish-Ukrainian border cooperation, the problem with activity of Romanian Populist Party, the problem of Viktor Orban position is a part of activity of Russian propaganda. For me, it's very clear. This terroristic act in Crocus City Hall, as for me, is a mirror of ready Kremlin propaganda to make Kremlin reality, because after statement of Islamic State about this massacre, Kremlin says about Ukrainian intelligence activity in this process, and I think that it's a very bright process of create a parallel reality in contemporary world. We must answer on question how we can defeat the Kremlin in informational confrontation. On this picture, you can see a missile cruiser Moskva. Another warship, but smaller warship Moskva, was undermined near Constanza port, near Romania coast, and we must create a bridge between these events. I think that we must effective development of critical thinking, and it is a part of activity of civil society, not only activity of state power. We must remind people of Russia's past and current defeats, and Ukraine must create and shape an anti-imperialist narrative, because our war with Russia is our independence war, and many countries involved have independence war in its history. We must use asymmetrical measures. For example, the arrest warrant for Putin was like nuclear undermining of authority of Putin involved, and can create a powerful leverage. And in finish of my presentation, my main conclusions. Countering Russian propaganda is our common interest, not only Ukraine, but interest of European Union, United States, NATO, Great Britain, and many active players of international relations. Russia tries to destroy Ukraine from within. Якщо, скажу українською саме для українських споживачів, якщо ви читаєте російськомовні телеграм-канали про порядок денний в Україні, анонімні телеграм-канали, ви просто споживаєте російську пропаганду. Вона просто доходить до вас. And the last one, hybrid threats have not disappeared. They are relevant for most European countries. And this year, the year of elections in the European Parliament, in the United States, maybe in Great Britain, it's not only a year of challenges, it's also a year of possibilities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your report and speech. I want to say that Eugen Magda is a rather famous person in media space, and that he is a professional in exactly informational aspects of politics, propaganda, and we are happy that you have a time and a possibility to participate face to face, because mostly our participants we have on Zoom. And with a great pleasure, I want to go to our next speaker, next participant. This is the representative of the European University Institute, Philip Pastelka, PhD in political science, professor. You are welcome, Philip.
Thank you. Thank you very much. May I share my screen?
Yes, please. You are welcome.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to present my research. So this is a piece on which I have been working with my lab. So most of my co-authors are doctoral researchers at the European University Institute. The only exception is Alexandra Jabur, who is a postdoctoral fellow. In this piece, we are interested in attitudes towards Russia's aggression against Ukraine. We want to investigate which factors are associated with pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian positions. So besides the substantive and social relevance of this topic, the motivation for this research is double. First, in earlier surveys, although most Europeans have condemned Russia's aggression against Ukraine, some respondents have displayed more ambivalent or even pro-Russian positions. This support for the aggressor is puzzling, and we want to investigate its sources. The second motivation is to contribute to the literature on political support in the context of military conflicts. Prior studies have mostly focused on countries that are directly involved in wars, and they have issued public sentiment in third countries. And the rare studies that focus on third countries that are not directly involved in military hostilities typically found that public opinion in those countries was poorly structured. So there were not really differences across social groups. So to tackle these questions, we fielded an original survey conducted in 5 European countries: the Czech Republic, France, Poland, Slovakia, and Romania. It spans more than 12,000 respondents. Our main findings are as follows, to spoil the punchline a bit. We find that attitudes toward the conflict are structured. There are clear differences across social groups. We find that neutral and pro-Kremlin positions strongly relate to support for domestic political parties, which with close links to the Kremlin, beliefs in conspiracy theories, and authoritarian ideology. Finally, economic factors, by contrast, such as the fact of struggling during the economic crisis or struggling because of Western sanctions against the Kremlin, explain very little. So these are the main findings. I will walk you now through the study step by step so that you can understand how we arrived at them. So as I foreshadowed in the existing literature, most authors assume that if a country is not directly involved in a military conflict, its public opinion will be poorly structured. So there will be no differences across social groups. A good example is, for instance, the US invasion against Iraq. Most citizens in Europe were disapproving of this invasion. There were not really differences across social groups. But this was a war that was quite geographically distant. And, there, basically, this war was probably not that relevant, salient for European public opinion. We expect that in situations in which wars happen, in one's neighborhood, relate to neighboring countries, and have clear domestic repercussions, public opinion will be more engaged, and basically the conflict will be more salient. And of course, Russia's aggression is highly relevant to most European countries. It's happening on the European continent. It involves Russia, which is a direct heir of the Soviet Union, which kept half of the continent behind the Iron Curtain. The war, besides obviously Ukraine, it affects also European trades and energy sectors. It prompted millions of Ukrainian refugees to flee the war and to join the European Union or to enter the European Union. The war obviously endangers European states' national security. And according to Eurobarometers, which are regular surveys conducted by the European Commission, the war is the most important issue that the European Union faces together with immigration. And so we expect that European public opinion on the war will be structured, and we want to investigate the correlates, which factors really matter for making one's mind on the conflict. We hypothesize that 4 types of factors may be particularly relevant: economic interests, ideology, political cues, and disinformation. And I will now discuss these different factors in turn. So first, economic interests. We know that the invasion prompted sanctions against Russia. And besides obviously punishing the aggressor, these sanctions had also some externalities. There were companies that were reliant on trade with Russia. And so perhaps some of their employees now who feel of the consequences could be a bit more pro-Russian, or it could have an effect on their attitudes. There was also the energy crisis, and some individuals struggled during the energy crisis. This energy crisis partly resulted from the war and the reactions to the war. And so our first hypothesis is that if anyone is pro-Russian, it could be partly to these factors. So the more Russia was important for citizens' economic activity before the invasion, the less they support Ukraine is our first hypothesis that we will test empirically. The next hypothesis is that the more citizens struggled during the energy crisis, the less they support Ukraine. The next factor that we consider is ideology. We reflect on left-right attitudes, authoritarianism, and pacifism. Based on the existing literature, we expect that extremists, those who are on the extreme left and extreme right, will be more favorable to the Kremlin, and they will support less for Ukraine for different reasons. I can elaborate on them. The more authoritarian citizens are, the less they support Ukraine, because they are probably, seeing authoritarian leaders, strongmen, more favorably. And finally, pacifists will oppose the war, of course, and they will support more Ukraine because Ukraine is the victim of this invasion. The next set of factors relate to political cues. The existing literature shows that most citizens have a very shallow knowledge of politics, and they rely on political elites to make their mind on foreign policy issues. And so we expect that the closer citizens are to pro-Kremlin parties, they will be influenced by their discourse and they will support less Ukraine. Conversely, those citizens who support governments, and most governments are clearly pro-Ukrainian, they will be more supportive of Ukraine. And those citizens who support less their governments, they will be less supportive of Ukraine. Finally, the last factor that we consider in our survey is disinformation. We all know that Russia has been using disinformation and conspiracy theories to influence public opinion, not only in Ukraine, in Russia, but also in Western countries. And we expect that those who are exposed to this disinformation, they will be less supportive of Ukraine, and those who believe in conspiracy theories, they will be less supportive of Ukraine. So these are our hypotheses that we test in this survey that was fielded in 5 countries, as I already mentioned. The Czech Republic, France, Poland, Slovakia, and Romania. The survey was fielded approximately 4 months ago in November 2023, or 5. The number of respondents is over 12,000. So we study mostly 2 dependent variables, 2 questions we study, to put it simply. Who is responsible for the war? And we ask about Russia, Ukraine, and NATO, and respondents were expected to give an answer on a 0-10 scale. 0 means not at all responsible, 10 means totally responsible. The second question that we study is whom you would like to win as a respondent. And we let them select between Ukraine, neither Russia nor Ukraine, Russia, and they obviously could say, don't know. So these are dependent variables. These are variables that we try to explain these questions. And the independent variables that we use to explain these questions are based on survey questions. And I will not go into details because due to lack constraints or due to lack of time, actually. I would like just to say that how we measure pro-Kremlin party proximity. This variable is based both on the survey and on information from another source, which is the so-called Chapel Hill expert survey, which classifies political parties, which basically this survey is sent to experts and they indicate their country's party positions on different issues. One of those issues was also proximity to the Kremlin. So to build this variable, we combine information from the survey, probability to vote. We ask respondents to what extent they are likely to vote for a political party. And we combine this information with this party position on Russia. And so this way we measure respondents' proximity to pro-Russian parties. But if this sounds a bit abstract, don't worry. I think that hopefully the results will be fully understandable. So this is the distribution of the first variables, attitudes, or basically blame attribution to different entities, to Russia, Ukraine, and NATO. As I mentioned, the responses on this variable are from 0 to 10. 0 means no responsibility at all. 10 means full responsibility for the war. And we can see that when in those 5 countries, European countries, most respondents consider that Russia is fully responsible. You can see that 10 here is clearly the mode in this distribution. So basically the most frequent value There is some variation, but clearly most European respondents consider Russia as fully responsible, which is reassuring. Then when we look at Ukraine and NATO, also most citizens consider that they are not at all responsible or very little responsible, but there is more variation. And we want to understand this variation, where it comes from, okay? So we built our dependent variable, which is a combination of these first two questions. So we subtract Ukraine's responsibility from Russia's responsibility, which yields a scale from -10, which means Ukraine is responsible, to 10, where Russia is responsible, okay? And so these are the results. These are country means, okay? And so the higher the mean, the more respondents blame Russia. And we can see that, fortunately, it's reassuring. In all countries, the mean position is above 0. So in all countries, on average, respondents blame more Russia. It's clearly the case in Poland, followed by France, and the lowest mean is in Slovakia, which is the most problematic country from this point of view, which is typically, we know, that is strongly under Russia's disinformation, and there the mean is the weakest. So let's proceed to the real analysis. So these are the results of a regression analysis, where we regress the dependent variable, this basically scale from -10 to +10 on citizens' characteristics as we measure them in the survey. These characteristics are on the left-hand side, and if you see a negative coefficient, it means that the given characteristic, if a respondent has these characteristics, leads him to blame more Ukraine. If it's a positive coefficient, these characteristics make the respondent blame more Russia. Of course, it works also in a reverse logic. So if respondents don't have these characteristics, they blame more Russia. If they have this characteristic, they can blame more Ukraine. So we can see that the three strongest factors are authoritarianism, pro-Kremlin party proximity, and conspiracy beliefs. So if respondents have an authoritarian ideology, they believe in conspiracy theories, they are close to pro-Kremlin parties, they are more likely to blame Ukraine, sorry. If they don't have these attributes, they are more likely to blame Russia. Pacifists here are more likely to blame Russia, and conversely, if one is not pacifist, this respondent will be a bit more likely to blame Ukraine. Okay, so this is the first question. Who is responsible for the war? The next question is, who should win the war according to the respondents? And so this is the distribution of responses to the second question, to our second dependent variable. We can see that in all countries, significantly more people want to win Ukraine rather than Russia, which is again reassuring. It's very clear in Poland, pretty clear in France, in most other countries as well. The only exception is in Slovakia, I would say, where the minority of people who want to win Russia is relatively high, unfortunately. But what is also interesting and a little bit not that idle, I guess, is the number of respondents in some countries who don't want to win any of the two entities. So this is a relatively larger percentage in Czechia, in Romania, and also in Slovakia. So we want to understand this variation. Who prefers another outcome than Ukrainians' victory? Okay, we want to explain it. And so again, this is based on a regression analysis. This time we used a multinomial regression analysis because we don't have a purely quantitative, or we don't have a quantitative dependent variable, but this doesn't really matter. The logic here is exactly the same as in the previous analysis. So you see coefficients which indicate to what extent the given characteristics predict a probability to prefer Ukrainians' victory over any other outcome. So basically, the more the positive value is, the more the given attribute is positively associated with wishing for Ukrainians' victory. The more negative any coefficient is, the more one wants another outcome rather than Ukrainians' victory. And you can see that the results are substantively very similar to the first analysis. So the three most important factors are authoritarianism, conspiracy beliefs, pro-Kremlin party proximity. So if individuals are authoritarian, believes in conspiracy theories, are close to pro-Russian party in their, domestic party, let's say AfD or the National Front in France. So if respondents have these kind of attitudes, they are more likely to favor another outcome than Ukraine's victory. If they don't have these attributes, they favors Ukrainians' victory. Okay. So this is to illustrate the role of these attributes. So here we show predicted probabilities of preferring Ukrainians' victory over any other outcome, dependent on the three main correlates: authoritarian ideology, proximity to pro-Russian parties, and conspiracy beliefs. So if individuals score 0 on these three variables, basically they don't believe in conspiracy theories, they are not close to a pro-Russian party, and they are not authoritarian, so they score 0, their probability to favor Ukrainians' victory is very high, 0.9. And their probability to favor neither's victory or Russia's victory is very low, nearly 0. Conversely, if individuals score the maximum value on these variables, so they believe in conspiracy theories, they are authoritarian, and they are close to pro-Russian party, their probability to favor Ukrainians' victory is very low, and their probability to favor neither's victory or Russia's victory is higher. Okay, so let me summarize this research. So we conducted a thorough investigation of attitudes towards Russia's aggression against Ukraine. It's based on an original survey fielded in 5 countries. And our findings reassuringly find that most European citizens support Ukraine over Russia. At the same time, there are some ambivalent and pro-Russian positions, which are sadly not that rare. So what we found based on our analyses is that pro-Russian attitudes are minimally related to economic interests. So pockets of Russia's support among European publics are not related to the energy crisis, are not related to Western sanctions. These are not the factors that explain potential pro-Russian positions. What explains this position are party cues, disinformation, and authoritarian ideology. So the closer respondents are to pro-Russian parties, the more they believe in disinformation and conspiracy theories, the more they have an authoritarian ideology, the more strongly they are likely to support pro-Russian positions. So these findings carry important implications for decision makers who cares about Russia's influence among the European publics. They underscore parties' stances and the spread of disinformation and conspiracy theories as the main sources of pro-Russian attitudes. So this research underscores the need for moderation of public debate and for an effective combat against disinformation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for your amazing calculation, amazing deep analysis, and its visualization. We hope that the European attitudes about the Ukrainian victory will come true as soon as possible. And I can say that we met Philippe with Irina during our fellowship in the European University Institute. And this fellowship inspired us to organize a conference and to discuss this question about the world order, about the future of Ukraine in a context of democratization. So thank you very much, Philippe. Nice to see you. And we are going to our next speaker. I have a pleasure to invite the representative of Bournemouth University, Dr. Steph Allen, Professor of Faculty of Media and Communication, and her professor, Elena Titova, our colleague from Law Institute. You're welcome.
Hello. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this really topical conference. And there are some very interesting discussions and perspectives to consider. Very briefly, I'm Dr. Stephanie Allen from Bournemouth University, and amongst other things, I work with the law students across undergraduate and PhD level. My own personal topic of interest is employment law and working conditions. And war does affect working conditions, even for those, not in the war zone directly, but also those in other countries with friends and family who are in regions that are affected. So really, in an age defined by swift technological advancements and the shrinking global village that we have, the intersection of digital diplomacy and conflict resolution stands really as a pivotal domain for policymakers, academics, and practitioners alike. So really, the ongoing evolution of digital tools intertwined with the influence of social media platforms has fundamentally altered the terrain upon which diplomatic endeavours, mediation processes, and peace-building initiatives transpire. But there is no doubt that difficult conversations, harsh words and actions, combined with miscommunication, disinformation, and conspiracies have taken place. And it can be argued that a strong focus on the intricate landscape of digital diplomacy, underscoring its significance in guiding the intricacies of conflict resolution within the contemporary information and communication system, is actually key. So this presentation on digital diplomacy and conflict resolution is a dual effort with Dr. Alina Titova. So I'll hand over. Alina.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you for your welcome word, yes, and for the introduction. First of all, I also would like to thank all of our participants, honorable members and colleagues from abroad for providing this interest to our country, to the issues, to the things that we are going through these days, or for the past more than 2 years already. For all of you, probably it's today a well-known fact that we are here living, surviving, coping, and not just only on the battlefield, but also on the field of the communication aspect. And well, in this case, I must say that diplomacy has to be the key, at least one of the key points of resolving the issue. And it is a well-known fact also that nowadays in Ukraine we have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs which is implementing its policy in this sphere. So also, I would like to say thank you to Philip, the previous speaker, yes, and Evgen, because they have spoken about issues which correlate in some way with the topic that we are raising today. In our presentation here. As for the work that is being done here in Ukraine, it's really from the side of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, it's a really, really tough job because the information war nowadays became a crucial part of our lives. You can find yourselves holding your phones in your hands every day, day and night, checking for information, searching for something, reading some news, and so on, and just to stay alive, to stay in focus, yes, what's happening, just to know what's going on around us. Before the war, the policy of, let's say, the public diplomacy of our country used to be focused more on cultural aspects, on some pleasant things, like culinary education, some economic, sports things, and really we were developing our efforts in that direction. But Today, it was necessary nowadays, since the war has started, it was necessary to refocus. It was necessary to think of new things, of new, let's say, ideas, how we can scream out loud and say to the world what is happening here in our country. And one of the important, let's say, ideas, one of the interesting ideas that the ministry came up with are some creative partnerships that are being held together with our communities, international communities, world Ukrainian communities abroad. There is a special institution which is called Ukrainian Institute here in Ukraine, and they are working with these issues as well. And also, of course, there are embassies, more than 100, over the 100 foreign diplomatic institutions all over the world, which are trying to tell and trying to implement the ideas, yes, and tell about the situation in our country here. Of course, there are a lot of official channels of communications, and probably you know all of them. Like nowadays, well, depending on the let's say on the people, yes, to whom we would like to address, it is necessary to be present in many different spheres, media spheres. And among them, you know that there are official websites, Facebooks, Twitters, Telegram channels, and so on. And of course, this is done to cover as much public as possible nowadays. So, well, these are some ideas that nowadays are crucial and important to, well, today we're talking about all this at this conference, and this is extremely vital. And, well, one of the, also like the conferences like this is one of means of forwarding the information to the world, what is happening here in Ukraine, because, well, as Philip mentioned previously in his speech, people might abroad, yes, people who live in other countries, especially thousands of kilometers away from our territory, may not know and may not absolutely understand what is happening, because the media nowadays is also, we know that media nowadays is also somehow, well, I wouldn't like to say corrupted, but it is following in many cases the interests of particular people. So that's why we here have to be aware. And well, I would also like to thank all of our students present here, because they are the young generation, the representatives of well, those in the nearest future, those professionals who would go out there in the world and who would speak for our country, who would fight not only just as our soldiers of armed forces are now doing on the battlefield, but also like they will be doing it on the diplomatic field, which is extremely important. So in general, these are the main ideas, the crucial things that I wanted to share with you. And of course, for us, it is extremely important to invest in such initiatives and to enhance digital literacy, cybersecurity, and of course digital diplomacy skills have to be involved in this conflict resolution processes. Well, I hope that in the nearest future we will come back again to the questions of culture, culinary education, and all the pleasant things, and not the war issues, and that the peace will come here to our country and to the whole world as well. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will give the word to Vera. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, Stefan and Elena, for this interesting discussion and comments. And I have a pleasure and honor to invite Alexandra Dashenko. She is a Doctor of Economic Science, Professor of Ukrainian Catholic University, and she has very interesting task, safety thinking. It's her author project. I think she can tell better about that. Alexandra, you're welcome.
Hello. Hello, dear colleagues. Hello, dear guests. And I have to say, thank you so much for this event, for this scientific conference. And I want to say grateful, thankful for our international guests, for our international partners, and you know, we very need to your support, and we're very glad. I am especially thankful for your support, because it's very important in our time and our war time, and I believe that our conversation, our cooperation, especially in this time, it's very important for all of us in the Europe and on the war. And I'm thankful for the organization for inviting me, because my scientific opportunity is economist. I'm economist, and I don't have a specialty education in the political science, but I'm sure that when we have something, especially in scientific sphere, on the congregation of the absolutely other sphere, we have great results. And thank you for introduce me. I have privilege to say something about security thinking, and I'm sure that it's very important. And I ask for a question why, but I have short presentation, of course, and I'm sure that you can see my presentation. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and why I can to say about something in the security. First of all, more than 10 years ago, I defend my dissertation in the economic security sphere, but more than 20 years I started to study security, and maybe you will be surprised, but it was on the so far in Ukraine. I'm sorry. It was in Lugansk region, and in this time, I think you understand that it was very important, not for East Ukrainian region, but for all Ukrainian, for all Ukrainian. What is joy of the life, maybe, but if I will seriously. My second displaced, I meet in Lviv, and on the 5 week from start of colonization of Russian military in Ukraine, I started my own project with name Security Thinking, and maybe it's more important than my scientific results, but of course I continue security of all of sphere, and in the national security too, and of course, as usually, I ask my colleague, my student, my anything else who see my stream, my project, my mini lectures on the YouTube and on the Facebook, on the stream. I ask, what do you think about security? What is security for you? And maybe if you have this opportunity, maybe you could write about this in our chat. Maybe what is security for you right now, or in general, or maybe on scientific thinking. I don't know. Why I ask you about it, because sometimes we don't think very deeply how security in general very important for us nowadays, and sometimes we don't. Oh, thank you for an answer. Maybe sometimes we don't compare our life with security in general. And during more than 2 years here in Ukraine, right now I'm in Kyiv, we think about security every time, every minute, every second, but we don't know how we have to build our security. And of course, we can have more answer for question why is security thinking important. But I search three more, as for my humble opinion, three the most important answer, because right now this is not about existential mindfulness. This is about survival to recovery and development. And I say about it not for Ukrainian only. This is about Europe too, and maybe more than European countries. And I'm deeply sure that if you say about security thinking, it's about dignity, because when I heard the previous speakers, I think about dignity for all people, which try to destroy the Russian aggression. Because I'm sure that we all of us understand that this war not only against Ukraine, this war against dignity of people or of world maybe. And my third answer, why is security thinking important? Because this is about democracy in the world time, because we can see how try to destroy democracy principle in the absolutely democracy countries, for example USA, for example UK, for example, and other countries of Europe, European Union and European countries. And I hope we understand who is our enemy, who is trying to do it, and my next position, what is my mind, what is my way of thinking. This is three key pillars of security, and this is not at first of all, this is not a triad. This is a conception I was created very many years ago, and this is absolutely a long-term conception, because this conception lives very many times, and I believe that it's for it will lives so many times ago. And if you have that right now we live in the AI interact times, this conception works in this time too. And first of all, we have to say that the first position when we say about security and when we say about security thinking, this is coordination or agreement maybe of interest. We have to understand what is our interest. When I say we and our, I mean all vertical or integrated from personal interest as person to national interest. As usually I citation in this position the Queen of UK that when she says that Great Britain don't have enemy or friends. Great Britain has absolutely interest. And when we say about interest, this is I had very many research with for interest, especially for economic interest, and this research shows that this researchers show that if we understand what is our interest, we can build a security environment more efficiently and more efficiency. And this is a key principle. When we say about that we have to safety, what we have to safety, what we have to defend, and what we have to development, we can be more resultative. We can be more peaceful, and we must have more result in the absolutely different sphere. And on the second position, we have to think about our triads and how we counteraction to triads. Of course, in nowadays we have so many triads that we don't counteraction. And in this position, as rule, I have so many templates for so many example that Ukrainian, especially Ukrainian army and Ukrainian people don't have so many tools for the defense of interest. For example, this is very afraid example, but when I ask some very qualified scientists what we have to do for the defense of a nuclear station, electric station, I mean, and I wait that her answer, it was woman, her answer will be, we have to development our international diplomacy, we have to have so many collaboration, we have to, and etc. But she answer was, you have to have more military. You have to have more weapons for the defend your electricity station and nuclear station, first of all. And this reality. And secondary, on the secondary position, we have to think about availability of resources and for the coordination of interest and for the counteraction to threats. And I am strongly I'm strongly sure that this event, when we say about very many positions of political, economic, and other science, this is a very powerful resource for the defense of our interest and our triads. And this is some position I have a short sentence about why about that? Why when we say about security thinking, why we have to think and why we have to understand why educational and higher educational especially is more important. I absolutely agree with Professor Magda. Then he says, then he said about Russian propaganda and Telegram channel. And during the time you read my slide, I say about I talk about some example. Some times ago, it was 2 or 3. Maybe it was a previous week. I have guest lecture in the some at some university, Ukrainian university, which have students who learn some economic program, and we conversation about national security, about history of the national security in the world, and etc. Never mind. But some student connection for the Zoom from Ukrainian territory, and there was some student who connect from occupation territory, and you know. I asked some question which was very surprised me, because it was absolutely as Methodist of Russian Methodistic. Of course, I answered for his question, but it was moment when I understand why I must read some lecture for the other student, for the all of territory Ukrainian, especially for East Ukrainian, and especially for students which connect from occupied territory, because it's not a lecture about history, about not national security, about security in the world in the full scale imagine. It's about create of the mindfulness, and it is it's so famous counter propaganda. And on the finish of my short presentation, I have to say that safety first, but science always. And short, not reclam, but I start my speech from the about my channel, about my project of security thinking. This is my channel, and right now there are more than 100 short and maybe not short videos, and you know, this is absolutely volunteer project, and I invite all of us who want to create something more than education, or maybe more than scientific research for my chair. I leave my contact, and why I think that that it's that I have to do it. I have a lot of and very many activities, but I believe that it's my involved, it's my donut, maybe intellectual donut in the create our environment more safety. And I believe that this project help adult education in adult education, and in the absolutely many people who have to live in more safety environment. And I am very, very glad that next time in the Friday we have to we will have I believe absolutely grateful conversation with Professor Svetlana Burbenyuk, and we will say about civil education. So I invite you. I will very glad to answer for your question, and it's my short visit card, and I have to thank you so much, Wandja, for this opportunity to visit this conference, and I believe that together we have to more and more and more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Good luck with your project. I hope we can have a lot of chance to participate in different meetings for the time. And thank you for contributing the question of safety, because it's really important, especially as for me, in informational aspect and a field of thinking of our minds, conscious, and so on. Thank you, and I'd like to invite to make a speech our good friend and our colleague from State Trade Economic University. This is Katerina Fedorishina, PhD in Political Science, Associate Professor. Katerina, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, for having me here. I'm very glad to see you all here and to see all these lovely presentations and hear all these inspiring ideas. Let me put the demonstration on. Just a second. Okay.
We can see it.
Yeah, just a second. I will make it the full screen if it lets me make it. All right, I will leave it just like that. First of all, I would like to thank all of the previous presenters, all of the previous professors for the inspiring ideas I've heard today. I wanted and I thought of making a presentation of a larger scale, but as far as we're limited with this time, I suppose it's 15 minutes for each presentation, I will be short. My presentation deals with the democracy at war case of Ukraine. In generally, it's about the problems the democracy faces during the war and the problems the democracy faces in particular within the factor of a freedom of speech and freedom of press. But today I think I'm going to choose more focused approach, including the very fact and referring from the very fact that all the previous speakers were sharing very inspiring ideas, which led me to think my presentation over and to find different maybe ideas and approaches to what I was going to speak about. And I was going to speak about the whole state of the freedom of speech in Ukraine and what it is like to remain within the freedom of speech in Ukraine during the war. You can see the results of the Reporters Without Borders Index for the 2023 for Ukraine, which shows the freedom of press and freedom of speech rating for Ukraine in 2023. And you see that the results have significantly improved, even comparing with the results of the same index for the 2022 and the 2021 and the 2019, which is very surprising because, you know, improving the freedom of speech during the war is quite a surprising thing. Nevertheless, when we analyze the results, we see that the whole improvement comes from the political indicator, economic indicator, and legislative indicator, which makes us understand that the whole political thing, the political landscape, the whole social landscape, and the legislative landscape that give opportunity for Ukrainian press to function fully and to be free, these factors have improved significantly. The security indicator has worsened because it's quite logical, because it is this war, and journalists are the first victims, victims that may be killed or targeted during war while making the broadcast or making their pieces on the battlefield or close to the battlefield. But I won't stop on that, and I won't be very deep with this whole idea. I would like to stop here. On the slide, you can see these are the results of the index, the freedom of speech for Ukraine within the Freedom in the World Index 2023. You know that the Freedom in the World Index shows the freedom of the basic democratic factors, the basic democratic, I would say, democratic instruments and the representation of democratic instruments within the democracy. And we see that the results of Ukraine are really grave here within the Freedom in the World Index. The Freedom in the World Index is quite interesting when we compare it, for example, with the index, the Economist Democracy Index, for example, or the Polity 4 or the new Polity 5 indices, because freedom in the world on the basically appraises the state of personal freedoms and the state of personal rights, the right for gathering, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, and these basic freedoms create the basis for assessing the state of freedom of any country, which in the result, every country which has been assessed by this index are called either free or particularly or partially free or non-free. Ukraine is a partially free country, which refers us to the very idea that Ukraine is a hybrid political regime, not a full democracy, not a flawed democracy, but a hybrid regime. Political regime. Nevertheless, when we see the ideas which led this index to these results, we can see that many ideas, many basic events which created this whole partially free situation for Ukraine deal with the idea of closing Russian news channels, with banning Russian information coming to Ukraine, with restricting some parts of information, which create the unbalanced informational landscape in Ukraine. And it brings us to the whole idea that during the war, democracy struggles with being democracy and protecting itself from the enemy. You know that from the outsider, democracy remains a democracy. Outsider understands that democracy has basic freedoms, basic rights, the basic characteristics which make democracy a democracy, which is the freedom of gathering, the freedom of press, the freedom of speech, the political competition, the free and transparent elections, the rule of law. All combined creates the very basis of democracy, even though we know that there are 500 or more different approaches to democracy and concepts of democracy. The whole basis of democracy is just the same. And if you restrict any of these basic rights and freedoms, you understand that democracy becomes quite troubled. But can we remain democratic during the war? There is a huge question, because when we today, Professor Magda was talking about this particular problem during his presentation about the propaganda of Russia in Ukraine. We understand that during the propagandistic times, we cannot remain that open and transparent, because being open and transparent in the informational field means being vulnerable. when we remain open, when we don't restrict information flowing inside our country and coming from our country outside, when we don't make it united, when we don't control this information, we create fruitful ground for our enemy to use this information against us, which means that we cannot remain democratic in basis, because democracy is a free information, democracy is a freedom of speech, democracy is a freedom of expression. So here we come to the problem of the contract theory. I have heard today one of our honored guests was talking about Thomas Hobbes and the contract theory. And when we're talking about the contract theory, we remind ourselves that there is an old idea about the contract between people and the government, between the people themselves, to create some third force to control and to create the order. Instead, people give up their rights and freedoms for the sake of the order. Even though the contract theory is quite contradictable and it remains quite questionable, nevertheless, when we talk about the contract theory here in Ukraine, within this very situation we are dealing with right now, we are talking about the contract in the society which lets us limit our rights and freedoms and forget about some basic democratic rights and freedoms for the sake of remaining alive, for the sake of remaining in the order for the sake of fighting our enemy. And I will show you the very facts that create the basis for this idea. Oh, it's not that slide. Yeah, it's this slide. How Ukrainians perceive democracy in 2022-2023. According to the research Democracy at War by Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiative Foundation, in the August 2022, 60% of Ukrainians believed that events in Ukraine were developing in the right direction. The whole idea was that the largest positive trust balance was placed in the armed forces, the state emergency service, and all the services and forces, which created order and helped protect the country. And the least trusting was in political parties, the judicial system, commercial banks, and parliament, which is quite traditional for Ukraine and absolutely natural, understanding the history of political nation of Ukraine and the development of democracy here in Ukraine. It's quite logical. But we can see that in Ukraine, unfortunately, we don't have the same data for 2023. We don't see this whole the data for perceived democracy in Ukraine in 2023 and 2024 as such. But in 2022, we can see that Ukrainians understand that they have to give up some particular basic rights and freedoms for the sake of being free and being alive. Inside of Ukraine, it looks like remaining democratic, but agreeing to limit the basic freedoms and rights for the sake of fighting. Which brings us to our Ukrainian Legislative Act of the martial law here, which limits some basic freedoms and rights. Ukrainians agree that it is fine. And Ukrainians agree that this doesn't make Ukraine non-democratic, even though it hinders democracy as such. But from the outsider, we understand that from the outsider's point of view, it looks like democracy has become worse, that democracy has troubles, and that we cannot call the democracy because it has some limits. Recently, I had a lecture for the colleagues in Pakistan, and the Pakistani students of political science, they asked me, can we call democracy democracy when we have the martial law? This is a very interesting question, because we understand that for Ukrainians, there is no difference if we have martial law and we have democracy, or we don't have the martial law and we don't have democracy, because we Ukrainians understand that it's all right to limit democracy and remain democratic, even within the martial law. But from the point of view of the outsiders, it's not fine. And here we see the collision in assessing the democracy inside of Ukraine and outside of Ukraine, and assessing the freedom of speech and the freedom of press and the freedom of expression inside of Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. And actually, my presentation had a little bit different direction, but as far as I focus on this very point, I would like to, I see that I'm out of time already, so finishing my ideas, I would like to say that this whole thing creates the fruitful ground for the enemy to use it against Ukraine and create these kind of narratives in the minds of Europeans and, for example, Americans, and even in the minds of people from Africa and from Middle East, for example, Pakistani students, as far as I heard, about the whole authoritarianism in Ukraine, because Ukraine has to fight and Ukraine has to limit its own freedoms and rights for the sake of fighting, because Ukraine has to shut down Russian TV channels, has to shut down Russian news channels to limit the propagandistic Russian flows here in Ukraine. Ukraine has to ban pro-Russian, for example, pro-Russian bloggers or pro-Russian journalists, who create and support and influence Russian narratives here in Ukraine and help enemy win this war in the information field, creating this kind of chaos and creating this kind of disbelief in Ukraine here inside of Ukraine. Is this the problem with the freedom of speech? I wouldn't say so, and I would say so. Altogether, this is the problem of democracy within the war. Can the democracy remain the democracy during the war? Can the democracy be the limited democracy during the war? From my point of view and my thought experiment brought me to this idea that democracy has to rethink its basics, has to rethink its contract, the contract which is created by the people in the democratic country, because of the necessity to survive. And this contract theory brings us to understanding that people give up intentionally their basic freedoms and rights to win and to create this order during the war. And it doesn't mean that democracy isn't the democracy anymore. Thank you so much. Thank you for attention. I hope I'm not out of time. Thank you. In case you have questions or comments, I would like to hear you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Katerina. I appreciate you have so much data, like the pools. I have a lot of new information, and thank you for your patience, because your speech was the last one during our session, our opening session. And now we have a time for the questions of all participants, discussions, comments. Anything you want to tell us, please, you're welcome. The students in our room and our Zoom also available to ask any questions. If you're very shy, you can write down into the chat. Welcome. Any questions? I remember that Katerina has the questions at the beginning, and I stopped her.
Well, I had a question and a comment. A question was meant for Professor Kostelka, but I think that he has left our gathering right now. I don't see him. Yeah. I would like to understand why he has chosen these particular countries for his research, but I suppose we can only find this research in an extended version and read this by ourselves. And the comment I had the comment which was meant for Professor. I'm sorry, I'm scared to say your name without proper pronunciation. Just a
That
second.
was after the report
Just
of
Stefan,
Stefan Auer. So you
Yeah, Professor Stefan Auer. Yeah, I had a comment. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, but if you let me, I wouldn't agree in one particular thing, that for Ukrainians, European Union is not interesting as European Union as such. From Ukrainian point of view, mostly, if you speak to Ukrainians, if you deal with Ukrainians, any union, NATO, European Union, is an opportunity to stop being on the crossroads of history and the crossroads of political games. You know, my dissertation was created on the basics, on the basis of correlation between different trends of developing of democracy in Ukraine and in geopolitical area, particular geopolitical area of Ukraine, surrounding Ukraine. And I found out that there were no particular trends, corresponding trends of democratic development between Ukraine and its neighbors. And it is very interesting, but it shows us that Ukraine has a very autonomous trend of development, of democratic development. It's first. But the second, Ukraine always struggles with being torn apart by its neighbors who don't want to support or be close to Ukraine while developing democracy, while developing political regimes. They want to influence or get something for themselves, which brings us to the whole situation that, one, Ukraine cannot protect itself because it has lost its nuclear weapons, it has lost its power, it's torn apart by different neighbors, it has autonomous trend of development, and altogether it is not welcomed in any unions and in any political and security. Okay, let's call them unions, political and security unions, because Ukraine is very big. Well, it's very big. It's the biggest country in Europe, and Ukraine is underdeveloped economically to support its membership in these unions. We understand it very well. But Ukraine has troubles with continuing economic development and political development because it remains autonomous on the crossroads of Europe. So for Ukrainians, this is the trouble of survival. For Ukrainians, being within some bigger union means being protected. It's not about having economic development or having more interesting opportunities for development. It means being protected because Ukrainians think Russia won't have as much power to influence Ukraine and won't have as much opportunities to fight with Ukraine if Ukraine is a part of Europe, official part of the European Union. Because, you know, if international organizations work as they should, Ukraine wouldn't have these troubles. If United Nations work as it should, Ukraine won't have these troubles because it could just go to this legislative to this organization and ask for the legislative opportunity to solve this question. But it's left it's just left on the road by itself. And this is why Ukrainians are interested in being the part of something bigger, much bigger. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No one should be afraid of pronouncing my name. I'm actually from Košice. I'm from Slovakia. I'm from your neighboring country. It's only about 2 hours drive to Ukraine. And I was fortunate enough, in November last year, I visited Lviv for a conference. So I'm far away, but I'm very close in my heart to Ukraine. And your fate is definitely very close to me. So I'm really grateful for your comments. And I think I understand the desire. Like I think that for the Czech Republic, for Slovakia, for the country of Central Europe, for the Baltic states, EU membership worked very well, right? And I'm upset about the current Slovak leadership, etc. But on the whole, this has been a very positive story. But it is worth remembering that the EU membership of these countries was preceded by NATO enlargement. And it took many people by surprise that the first Czechoslovak president and then post-communist president and then the president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, who is better known as a kind of peaceful revolutionary, right, was very much in favor of NATO membership. And I mean, that I'm curious to hear from you. So I respect that if people believe that EU membership is more important than NATO membership in Ukraine, I respect that. But I am just despairing at the reality of power, and that is the EU. The EU has always had enough power to anger Russia, but not enough power to protect Ukraine, because the EU is not a sovereign actor, right? It was created as a trading bloc. It doesn't have military capabilities. And if I had 20 minutes for my presentation, I would go through some of those outlandish promises that major EU leaders made. Like, you remember Joseph Borrell promising, like on day 3 after the invasion, that Ukraine will get fighter jets from EU, and you are still waiting for these fighter jets. The EU has no army, no fighter jets to give, right? And I mean, I'm delighted that the US block on further assistance to Ukraine was just released a few days ago. And the US assistance has dwarfed whatever Europeans have managed to put together, right? So my hunch is that it would have been even diplomatically more probably rewarding for Ukraine to focus on the US, even cultivating relationship with the Republican Party that has been rather obstructionist, right? Which I find annoying, but that's the reality of politics. So the EU is not, and you said that, right? That if international organizations worked well, Ukraine would not be in this situation. I'm aware of the Budapest Memorandum, right? And all these promises that were repeatedly made to Ukraine. But this is what frustrates me. And I published that journal article in the Journal of Common Market Studies about the EU over-promising and under-delivering. And I think that, unfortunately, the EU remains on the same trajectory. So even EU membership, which I think is an absolute must, but even EU membership is, I think, a very elusive aim when you see that when it comes to economic interests, individual member states are already much more hesitant, including Poland, that is oftentimes seen as the staunchest ally of Ukraine. So less promises and more action. And I think that for Ukraine, in my view, but tell me if you think that many people in Ukraine have different views, I am curious to hear that. But in my view, NATO membership would be much more important, right, than EU, because EU is not a military actor, and the primary problem that Ukraine has is to contain Russia. Yeah, but I think we are probably on the same page. So I am just despairing the EU, but as a Central European, I am also delighted about the fact that the EU is the sphere of stability and prosperity. But like, I am also increasingly thinking that positive post-1989 story that the Europeans like to tell themselves is rather false, in that it is very pleasing to think of the EU's success in relation to Central and Eastern Europe, including my homeland. But the question I have, and I'm asking myself, and I want to discuss in my next book, is whether that came to some extent at the expense of the countries behind the EU borders, right? That Ukraine was stuck in that in-between land. Even Belarus, when I was in Lviv I met representatives from the government in exile from Belarus, very impressive, courageous people fighting for a democratic Belarus, right? These countries were basically left on their own, and the EU repeatedly made promises that it was unable to honor. And my biggest worry is that we are still in the same kind of pattern, you know. But thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, yes, that if you had more time, you would explain this much more profound. And I understand now that we're on the same side in this question. You know, in Ukraine, I used to be a journalist for many years. And as a journalist, I was writing about the foreign policy, the international affairs, and the international economy. And being the journalist, I had an opportunity to have many pieces, materials, and interviews on the NATO expansion and on the European Union expansion. And what I remember, what I see now, that Ukraine lacks understanding of the economic side of NATO expansion and the economic side of European Union expansion. In Ukraine, there is a whole understanding that European Union and NATO is the matter of political will only, that it's not about creating economic background for joining these organizations, that it is not about the creating of particular budget stability and particular economic backgrounds and particular features of your economy to be stable and to give something to these organizations. For Ukrainians, you know, Ukraine is a quite young political nation, and Ukrainians don't have this level of political culture and political behavior to understand these things. They only begin understanding it and begin understanding these whole international games and international things. And we understanding this, we understand that there is lack of, for example, of international journalists here in Ukraine, the magazines and channels and podcasts on international relations and international economy. Ukrainians don't know these things much. We are concentrating on local things, our local affairs. This all brings us to the whole idea that whatever our politicians want to give us, due to the information about the expansion of NATO, the European Union, they give us, and we consume this very fact. We don't think twice. This is why, as a journalist, I remember that each time we were talking about the expansion of NATO, the expansion of European Union, we were talking about the economy. But it's not the time to talk about economy now, because it is destroyed. Absolutely. We have so many troubles with economy. We cannot just re-establish it just on the spot. We will need support. We will need help because we are destroyed. And today, unfortunately, this whole economic thing, it is left aside. Because it's, from my point of view, it's even strange to talk about economy right now from Ukrainian point of view. But it's very vital to understand not only in which direction we're going, but are we welcomed there? It's very important for Ukrainians to understand, are we welcomed there? Because it all creates the disillusion, and the disillusion in one particular democratic way of development brings us to the other side of this spectrum. And you know that there is the whole idea in political science that if you are in the unbalanced hybrid political regime, you have more chances to become autocratic than to become democratic, because you swing between these two poles, and there is a huge chance for you to become autocratic. So it is very important for Ukrainians to not be disillusioned, because a huge autocratic Ukraine wouldn't be fruitful for anyone, including the Central Europe and all the Western world. Huge autocratic Ukraine is a bad thing, you know. Thank you.
Thank you for interesting discussion. I can also support the idea that we can be a part of the world, a part of Europe, and that we want to feel support and consolidation with the other countries, which means a lot for us, because which try to not to be isolated with our problems and our solutions. Thank you. Maybe any other questions, ideas? Professor Anastasius, you're welcome.
Close it because you hear me from here. Look, I have a colleague in Berlin who told me one day, she's born here, she is from Lviv, and she told me, yeah, the funny thing or the strange thing for me as an Ukrainian is that Putin managed to make us feel as a nation. And this was a very interesting point for me, because if you see the history of, after 1991, the history of Ukraine, for me, even from political conviction or from any point of view, Ukraine was never a hybrid democracy. You know, as I was walking here yesterday, close, I saw this higher court for the corruption. It's on the other side of the road. These things existed in many countries. 2 years ago, with I forgot his name, with Fyodor, one of the professors, when I presented the same theories here, we had a very long discussion. From the 20 minutes of the presentation, we were discussing for 1.5 hours. And one of the points, it was, you in Europe, you forget us. I will tell you from, you see my name. Basically, I'm Greek. I have 2 passports. I have a Greek one and a German one. In Greece, we are living, since I was born, always with the threat of a frenemy, which is Turkey. Okay, so we are growing up. I have gone to the army. I served for 18 months. We were very close always to almost war situations. That's why I called Turkey is a very interesting case of the frenemies, because you see what is they are doing also with Ukraine. Discussing with Putin, discussing with USA, going against Israel, going against Iran. They play always this game. And I remember always, and Katerina, thank you for this, because you gave me a thought to express here. What we are learning in Greece, let's say, from what we believe, is that when the moment of the war is coming, you are always alone. You may have alliances, but a foreign army will not come in your territory to fight for you. And this is the miracle that happened practically in Ukraine, that by having all this time to have a preparation, you remember Putin going against Merkel and discussing, we knew that the Minsk agreements will never happen, because it was a continuous hybrid warfare, like the practically like Yevgen before described. So at this moment, if the people in Ukraine have or would have the wrong expectation that the United Nations will intervene, or this never happened the last 75, 80 years since they exist, or that I hope that this will happen, that Macron practically will make the big move. You know, the armies in Romania, everybody knows this. So it's the Foreign Legion, they're sitting there. So if they will come in the territory of Ukraine, this will be a great moment in the human history, practically, in order to make this kind of enhancement. So at the end of the day, if the people here were, because of this state of exception, we will not move to this next level, we will not be here today. So this happened already. And I think the discussion that we had before this with Stefan is practically, you are going back to the political action itself. You said correctly, we may have, or we saw, we may have technology, we may have the economy, but what is happening in Ukraine the last 2 years, and I think personally, to have a shift to an authoritarian state here, I don't think this is possible. Okay, because last, let's say, the country elected with all the problems that it had, with the problem of the corruption, with the problem of the post-Soviet era, elected already 6 presidents. You know, I'm a very big fan. I saw the whole series of President Volodymyr with Zelensky. But if you see this with a critical point of view, for me, seeing that and being involved since a couple of years with Ukraine, I saw something, I will not say prophecies, but you see some trends and the whole what it was expressed there. 2 last points. Katerina also spoke about Hobbes, who with the Leviathan, which is a very interesting general knowledge reading for every person, I think. There we are speaking as Carl Schmitt with his ambiguous past. We are speaking about the sovereign. We are speaking that, as you correctly, Katerina said, the people are giving the power to somebody to protect them. Okay, or that's why we should not have, under normal circumstances, a weapon on us. At the same moment, Hobbes, although he is, let's say, conservative, he is writing also in Leviathan that the people, they have the right to go against their sovereign, the ruler, in the moment that this ruler is not protecting them. And this is what happened. That's why I mentioned this back in 2014. This was happened. You know, there are all these conspiracy theories that the CIA was in the background and all these stories. Personally, don't believe it. From what I see, it was really a change in a moment that somebody should choose, a nation should choose a track. And this is what happened with all the problems. Now, for the freedom of speech and the freedom of the sensitivity of the information, also what somebody should learn from Ukraine is that the way that the whole issue is balanced, it is quite impressive, taking into account the background of Ukraine. If I would compare this, I mean, how this would work in Germany, which is my second country, let's say. There are very, very big discussions always about journalism, what the journalist should show and should not show. Of course, we have the freedom of speech, but still, in this state of exception, the way it works in Ukraine, I think this would deserve a higher ranking. And as I said, for closing, I don't think that Ukraine is in a hybrid democracy. So I mean, especially the last 3-4 years with the invasion. So these are some prerequisites. It's difficult to foresee the future. Okay, that's why we are here. But I think there is a good perspective. Okay, of course, a help is needed. Like I was traveling to come via Poland, and I was really happy when on Saturday I started receiving this news. I had some discussion with friends from the United States and in Germany, and I saw this about the famous voting or the help. And you see also Scholz, in order, because Stefan was very critical, I guess, with the Scholzing. It is a matter of fact that there is a very big discussion in Germany about the way, the Germans are not, I will not say, they're not flexible. Okay, so many people are not flexible. So the structure, how the democracy works, it needs some discussion. Of course, you see now that Germany practically, in order to defend also a little bit Scholz, even with these difficulties, even with this struggling and all these things, Germany is, he announced recently another big help, plus the money, plus the patriot systems that they contribute to the defense of the country. It's very interesting, as said, to see that. That's why I like this intellectual discussion we had by emails with Stefan, because you see the case of Ukraine is putting question how we are functioning also in our democracies, because the people are sleeping very often. You see, we have the European election. There is what Yevgeny said before about hybrid warfare. You see the case also, and I will close with this, with the party of Wagner. So practically, there is an accusation that Moscow, since years, they are practically trying to entangle or to put pressure from both sides. So they are using AFD, the Front National in France, that they changed the name. There is always, you saw in the French parliament, there was a discussion, the Russians are not only in Ukraine, the Russians are also in the French parliament, so they have very strong debates. I think this is only to the good of everybody, because for the first time we are discussing this. Okay, and this is the most important point for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment, for your discussion. I think that you are here and you can understand us clearly, but sometimes people who are far from Ukraine, it is difficult for them to understand all realities, and that's why such question like support or not support, some solutions, they are a bit difficult, and it takes some time to have some solutions. And I hope that such events like our conference can make us understand better all the situation. And I invite everyone, all participation to the first cooperation, collaboration. Thank you for all of your contributions. And maybe any other comments, ideas. I think our students are a bit tired because we had a bad weather right now in Kiev. It is raining. It's a bit cold. So I think we have some minutes to conclude, to highlight, and I want to ask maybe some of our co-organizers want to tell a few words about today's event. Maybe Irina or Anastasius.
Yes, thank you, Vera. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Dear colleagues, dear participants, thank you a lot for organizing this meeting, and thank you for joining us. I'm sorry I can't say properly because I got a cold, but I want to add something. I would like to say that Ukrainians' opinion to Olaf Scholz and to Germany is changing now, and we are now see that Ukrainians understand that support from Germany is very huge, and this is where partner number 2 on economic aid for Ukraine, for example, and so on. So now we are working in our classes and in our media for changing the situation according the previous view and previous what Scholz. So this was my short comment. Thank you for your ideas, and I would like to say that all presentations were amazing, and I'm happy that we have had such opportunities to share our ideas and to view the points from Europe, from different countries, from Ukraine, and we can compare our opinions on Ukrainian situation, on Russian aggression, on public opinions, on propaganda, and so on. And I think that maybe we can propose something new, and maybe some joint project we can apply about propaganda, about public opinion, or about how to Ukraine can win and how Ukraine win in the future. So thank you, and I hope that you had a good time here, and please join us to our another meeting and our events. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. And Stasius,
Yes.
would you like to conclude?
I would like to conclude. So first, I have to say thanks to Stefan, because I think he has to leave, although it's still it is 6 hours and 5 hours in front of us. Thanks for coming and to this with these means. I think it's very important what is taking place here. You saw Stefan was previously in Lviv. I have been several times since the beginning of the war, practically in Ukraine, not in Kiev. I see that there is also a very interesting, for Emilia, a very interesting question about what it will happen in the post-war governance. Actually, I had a discussion before with the other, I forgot her name, the one who came to pick me up. Olga told me a very interesting point during the coffee time that there is this foresight group. So there are people thinking about this. But as I said before, the most important is to have the political action. So to decide what to do. So this will be decided, of course, by the people of Ukraine. There will be elections. Now we are in this state of exception again. For sure, as I said, what is happening in Ukraine, it is tragic because people are dying. But this struggle here inspires also many people to rethink how we are thinking about our society. So that's why I'm supporting that somebody should be here physically, and as you said, to understand what is the real situation. To see something from Twitter or from the social media, it is nice, but you understand how it is only when you are here, so practically. So thank you from my part also for the honor to be here. We will continue also later on with the next sessions. Yeah, okay. Katerina wants to say something also. Yes, or you say bye.
A lot of
No. I would like just 1 minute to answer the question of our guest, Emilia Kovalevska. It's nice to meet you, Emilia. And well, answering your question, if you Google the whole expression, like what's going to be with Ukraine after the end of the war, how Ukraine is going to renovate and build up after the end of the war, you will see that this is the most heated question in Ukrainian press. Ukrainian press is the main stakeholder that creates the whole landscape of thinking about the Ukraine after the war. And this question is one of the most interesting and the most heated questions between Ukrainian thinkers, political scientists, I would say public political scientists who appear on the on TV and in official journalist channels. And we can see that this discussion is never ending right now, and we haven't come to the concrete conclusion about the end of this whole war. But the main question is, how are we going to build our economy after the war, and how are we going to renovate our economy? The political side of this whole thing is the second question, because economy now for Ukraine is a grave thing and is the question number one. So if we're talking about the stakeholders, we have non-governmental civil organizations who think about these things and create this whole analytical reports about these things, but there are no many, but you can find some. And the main stakeholders are Ukrainian journalists. If I answered your question, thank you so much.
Could I just have 1 minute, because I would like to thank again Anastasios Fountis. It was a great privilege to be able to join you, and I would have loved to come to Kiev, but it's not that practical from so far away. So this was a fantastic opportunity for me, and thank you also for the comments. And I want to add just one thing, that I'm immensely kind of relieved to hear that slide about Scholzing is obsolete, that it's not true, because I have been following these developments, and I am very pleased to see that Germany is now lifting its game, and it is clearly the leader in Europe, and there is some hope that it can persuade other European partners to contribute. And I would also like to kind of end on a positive note. So my presentation was mostly about cautioning about high expectations on EU, that the EU might not deliver. But you know, when you point out rightly that economic problems are enormous, it is worth remembering that the countries of Central Europe were also not prosperous when they joined NATO, right? They were also not doing all that well economically when they joined the EU. So if there is political will, it can be, a lot can be achieved. And this is very important, right? I mean, I find it regrettable. Zeitenwende, in my view, should have happened 10 years ago, or at least 2 years ago. It is happening now, but it's still better now than never. And I'm talking about this radical transformation of German position on Ukraine, on Russia. And with Germany's kind of leadership, there is obviously hope for Ukraine. So I think as long as there is a growing understanding across Western Europe, across Europe, that Ukraine's fate really is intimately linked with Europe's fate, then the future is more positive, both for Europe and Ukraine. But what I try to do in my publications, and I even wrote an article for the Financial Times 2 years ago, is to raise that awareness across Western Europe. So maybe some of my comments were then misdirected. I don't need to tell you about what Germany could have done better because you were at the receiving end of it. But I'm really grateful for your comments, and also kind of relieved that Germany's image also in Ukraine is changing, because I think Germany has done a lot. So thank you, and thanks again for your kind invitation, and thanks to Professor Anastasios Fountis for initiating it. I hope I can visit you in person in not too distant the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much again for all participants, for your contribution, for your support. It's rather important for us, for Ukrainian academic staff and for Ukraine. I think I can see many new ideas for the discussions, and I hope we will see all of you soon on other stages. And also, I believe that Ukraine in today's situation have not only threats but also opportunities. And today's report discussions make us believe that we have to suppose that our victory will come soon, and we will live as a peaceful and civilization country. So thank you again. I would like to inform that we will publish all the theses, all the articles of today's participants, and we can continue our discussions on the, via emails or some other contacts. You are welcome to participate, to visit Kyiv as far as it will be possible according to situation. Thank you very much, and glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini. Thank you. We are finishing our translation and hope that see you soon again.
Thank you so much for a great gathering. Thank you so much.